Chapter 32 of Don Quixote, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Phil Surratt. Don Quixote, Volume 2, by Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra. Translated by John Ormsby. Chapter 32. Of the reply Don Quixote gave his censurer, with other incidents grave and droll. Don Quixote, then having risen to his feet, trembling from head to foot like a man dosed with mercury, said in a hurried, agitated voice, "The place I am in, the presence in which I stand, and the respect I have and always have had for the profession to which your worship belongs, holds and binds the hands of my just indignation, and as well for these reasons as because I know, as every one knows, that a gownsman's weapon is the same as a woman's, the tongue. I will with mine engage in equal combat with your worship, from whom one might have expected good advice instead of foul abuse. Pious, well-meant reproof requires a different demeanour and arguments of another sort. At any rate, to have reproved me in public, and so roughly, exceeds the bounds of proper reproof, for that comes better with gentleness than with rudeness. And it is not seemly to call the sinner roundly blockhead and booby, without knowing anything of the sin that is reproved. Come, tell me, for which of the stupidities you have observed in me do you condemn and abuse me, and bid me go home and look after my house and wife and children without knowing whether I have any? Is nothing more needed than to get a footing, by hook or by crook, in other people's houses to rule over the masters, and that perhaps after having been brought up in all the straightness of some seminary, and without having ever seen more of the world than may lie within 20 or 30 leagues around, to fit one to lay down the law rashly for chivalry and pass judgment on knights errant? Is it, haply, an idle occupation, or is the time ill spent that is spent in roaming the world in quest, not of its enjoyments, but of those arduous toils whereby the good mount upwards to the abodes of everlasting life? If gentlemen, great lords, nobles, men of high birth, were to rate me as a fool, I should take it as an irreparable insult, but I care not a farthing if clerks who have never entered upon or trod on the paths of chivalry should think me foolish. Knight I am, and knight I will die, if such be the pleasure of the Most High. Some take the broad road of overweening ambition, others that of mean and servile flattery, others that of deceitful hypocrisy, and some that of true religion. But I, led by my star, follow the narrow path of knight-errantry, and in pursuit of that calling I despise wealth, but not honour. I have redressed injuries, righted wrongs, punished insolences, vanquished giants, and crushed monsters. I am in love, for no other reason than that it is incumbent on knights-errant to be so. But though I am no carnal-minded lover, but one of the chaste platonic sort. My intentions are always directed to worthy ends, to do good to all and evil to none, and if he who means this, does this, and makes this his practice deserves to be called a fool, it is for your highness to say, O most excellent Duke and Duchess." "Good, by God!" cried Sancho. "Say no more in your own defence, master mine, for there is nothing more in the world to be said, thought, or insisted on. And besides, when this gentleman denies, as he has, that there are or ever have been knights errant in the world, is it any wonder if he knows nothing of what he has been talking about?"
"Perhaps, brother," said the ecclesiastic, "you are that Sancho Panza that is mentioned, to whom your master has promised an island?"
"Yes, I am," said Sancho, "and what's more, I am one who deserves it as much as anyone. I am one of the sort, attach thyself to the good, and thou wilt be one of them, and of those, not with whom thou art bred, but with whom thou art fed, and of those, who leans against a good tree, a good shade covers him. I have lent upon a good master, and I have been for months going about with him, and please God, I shall be just such another. Long life to him, and long life to me, for neither will he be in any want of empires to rule, or I of islands to govern." "No, Sancho, my friend, certainly not," said the Duke, "for in the name of Señor Don Quixote, I confer upon you the government of one of no small importance, that I have at my disposal." "Go down on thy knees, Sancho," said Don Quixote, "and kiss the feet of his excellence for the favour he has bestowed upon thee." Sancho obeyed, and on seeing this the ecclesiastic stood up from the table completely out of temper, exclaiming,
By the gown I wear, I am almost inclined to say your excellence is as great a fool as these sinners. No wonder they are mad, when people who are in their senses sanction their madness. I leave your excellence with them, for so long as they are in the house, I will remain in my own, and spare myself the trouble of reproving what I cannot remedy."
And without uttering another word or eating another morsel, he went off, the entreaties of the Duke and Duchess being entirely unavailing to stop him. Not that the Duke said much to him, for he could not, because of the laughter his uncalled-for anger provoked. When he had done laughing, he said to Don Quixote, "You have replied on your behalf so stoutly, Sir Knight of the Lions, that there is no occasion to seek further satisfaction for this, which, though it may look like an offence, is not so at all, for, as women can give no offence, no more can ecclesiastics, as you very well know." "That is true," said Don Quixote, "and the reason is, that he who is not liable to offence cannot give offence to anyone, women, children, and ecclesiastics, as they cannot defend themselves, though they may receive offence, cannot be insulted, because between the offence and the insult there is, as your excellence very well knows, this difference. The insult comes from one who is capable of offering it, and does so, and maintains it. The offence may come from any quarter without carrying insult. To take an example. A man is standing unsuspectingly in the street, and 10 others come up armed and beat him. He draws his sword and quits himself like a man, but the number of his antagonists makes it impossible for him to effect his purpose and avenge himself. This man suffers an offence, but not an insult. Another example will make the same thing plain. A man is standing with his back turned, another comes up and strikes him, and after striking him takes to flight, without waiting an instant, and the other pursues him but does not overtake him. He who received the blow received an offence, but not an insult, because an insult must be maintained. If he who struck him, though he did so sneakingly and treacherously, had drawn his sword and stood and faced him, then he who had been struck would have received offence and insult at the same time. Offence because he was struck treacherously, insult because he who struck him maintained what he had done, standing his ground without taking to flight. And so, according to the laws of the accursed duel, I may have received offence, but not insult, for neither women nor children can maintain it, nor can they wound, nor have they any way of standing their ground, and it is just the same with those connected with religion. For these 3 sorts of person are without arms offensive or defensive, and so, though naturally they are bound to defend themselves, they have no right to offend anybody. And though I said just now I might have received offence, I say now certainly not, for he who cannot receive an insult can still less give one. For which reasons I ought not to feel, nor do I feel, aggrieved at what that good man said to me. I only wish he had stayed a little longer, that I might have shown him the mistake he makes in supposing and maintaining that there are not, and never have been, any knights errant in the world. Had Amedee, or any of his countless descendants, heard him say as much, I am sure it would have not gone well with his worship." "I will take my oath of that," said Sancho. "They would have given him a slash that would have slid him down from top to toe like a pomegranate or a ripe melon. They were likely fellows to put up with jokes of that sort. By my faith, I am certain if Reynaldos of Montalvan had heard that little man's words, he would have given him such a spank on the mouth that he wouldn't have spoken for the next 3 years. Aye, let him tackle them, and you'll see how he'll get out of their hands." The Duchess, as she listened to Sancho, was ready to die with laughter, and in her own mind she set him down as droller and madder than his master, and there were a good many just then who were of the same opinion. Don Quixote finally grew calm, and dinner came to an end, and as the cloth was removed, 4 damsels came in, one of them with a silver basin, another with a jug also of silver, a third with 2 fine white towels on her shoulder, and the 4th with her arms bared to the elbows, and in her white hands, for white they certainly were, a round ball of Naples soap. The one with the basin approached, and with arch composure and impudence thrust it under Don Quixote's chin, who, wondering at such a ceremony, said never a word, supposing it to be the custom of that country to wash beards instead of hands. He therefore stretched his out as far as he could, and at the same instant the jug began to pour, and the damsel with the soap rubbed his beard briskly, raising snowflakes, for the soap lather was no less white, not only over the beard, but over all the face, and over the eyes of the submissive knight, so that they were perforce obliged to keep shut. The Duke and Duchess, who had not known anything about this, waited to see what came of this strange washing. The barber damsel, when she had him a hand's breadth deep in lather, pretended that there was no more water, and bade the one with the jug go and fetch some, while Señor Don Quixote waited. She did so, and Don Quixote was left the strangest and most ludicrous figure that could be imagined. All those present, and there were a good many, were watching him, and as they saw him there with half a yard of neck, and that uncommonly brown, his eyes shut, and his beard full of soap, it was a great wonder, and only by great discretion, that they were able to restrain their laughter. The damsels, the concocters of the joke, kept their eyes down, not daring to look at their master and mistress, and as for them, laughter and anger struggled within them, and they knew not what to do, whether to punish the audacity of the girls or to reward them for the amusement they had received from seeing Don Quixote in such a plight. At length the damsel with the jug returned, and they made an end of washing Don Quixote, and the one who carried the towels very deliberately wiped him and dried him, and all four together making him a profound obeisance and curtsy, they were about to go when the Duke, lest Don Quixote should see through the joke, called out to the one with the basin, saying, "Come and wash me, and take care that there is water enough." The girl, sharp-witted and prompt, came and placed the basin for the Duke as she had done for Don Quixote, and they soon had him well soaped and washed, and having wiped him dry, they made their obeisance and retired. It appeared afterwards that the Duke had sworn that if they had not washed him as they had Don Quixote, he would have punished them for their impudence, which they adroitly atoned for by soaping him as well. Sancho observed the ceremony of the washing very attentively, and said to himself, "God bless me! If it were only the custom in this country to wash squires' beards too, as well as knights! For by God and upon my soul I want it badly, and if they gave me a scrape of the razor besides, I'd take it as a still greater kindness." "What are you saying to yourself, Sancho?" asked the Duchess. "I was saying, Señora," he replied, "that in the courts of other princes, when the cloth is taken away, I have always heard say they give water for the hands, but not lye for the beard, and that shows it is good to live long that you may see much. To be sure, they say too that he who lives a long life must undergo much evil, though to undergo a washing of that sort is pleasure rather than pain." "Don't be uneasy, friend Sancho," said the Duchess. "I will take care that my damsels wash you, and even put you in the tub, if necessary." "I'll be content with the beard," said Sancho, "at any rate, for the present, and as for the future, God has decreed what is to be." "Attend to worthy Sancho's request, Seneschal," said the Duchess, "and do exactly what he wishes." The Seneschal replied that Señor Sancho should be obeyed in everything, and with that he went away to dinner and took Sancho along with him, while the Duke and Duchess and Don Quixote remained at table discussing a great variety of things, but all bearing on the calling of arms and knight-errantry. The Duchess begged Don Quixote, as he seemed to have a retentive memory, to describe and portray to her the beauty and features of the lady Dulcinea del Toboso, for, judging by what fame trumpeted abroad of her beauty, she felt sure she must be the fairest creature in the world, nay, in all La Mancha. Don Quixote sighed on hearing the Duchess's request, and said, "If I could pluck out my heart and lay it on a plate on this table here before your Highness's eyes, it would spare my tongue the pain of telling what can hardly be thought of, for in it your excellence would see her portrayed in full. But why should I attempt to depict and describe in detail, and feature by feature, the beauty of the peerless Dulcinea, the burden being one worthy of other shoulders than mine, an enterprise wherein the pencils of Parrhasius, Timantes, and Apelles, and the graver of Lysippus ought to be employed, to paint it in pictures and carve it in marble and bronze, and Ciceronian and Demosthenian eloquence to sound its praises." "What does Demosthenian mean, Señor Don Quixote?" said the Duchess. "It is a word I never heard in all my life." "Demosthenian eloquence," said Don Quixote, "means the eloquence of Demosthenes, as Ciceronians mean that of Cicero, who were the two most eloquent orators in the world." "True," said the Duke. "You must have lost your wits to ask such a question. Nevertheless, Señor Don Quixote would greatly gratify us if he would depict her to us. For never fear, even in an outline or sketch, she will be something to make the fairest envious." "I would do so, certainly," said Don Quixote, "had she not been blurred to my mind's eye by the misfortune that fell upon her a short time since, one of such a nature that I am more ready to weep over it than to describe it. For your Highnesses must know that, going a few days back to kiss her hands and receive her benediction, approbation, and permission for this third sally, I found her altogether a different being from the one I sought. I found her enchanted and changed from a princess into a peasant, from fair to foul, from an angel into a devil, from fragrant to pestiferous, from refined to clownish, from a dignified lady into a jumping tomboy, and, in a word, from Dulcinea del Toboso into a coarse Sayago wench." "God bless me!" said the Duke aloud at this. "Who can have done the world such an injury? Who can have robbed it of the beauty that gladdened it, of the grace and gaiety that charmed it, of the modesty that shed a lustre upon it?" "Who?" replied Don Quixote. "Who could it be but some malignant enchanter of the many that persecute me out of envy, that accursed race born into the world to obscure and bring to naught the achievements of the good, and glorify and exalt the deeds of the wicked? Enchanters persecute me still, and enchanters will continue to persecute me until they have sunk me and my lofty chivalry in the deep abyss of oblivion, and they injure and wound me where they know I feel it most. For to deprive a knight-errant of his lady is to deprive him of the eyes he sees with, of the sun that gives him light, of the food whereby he lives. Many a time before I have said it, and I say it now once more, a knight-errant without a lady is like a tree without leaves, a building without a foundation, or a shadow without the body that causes it." "There is no denying it," said the Duchess. "But still, if we are to believe the history of Don Quixote that has come out here lately with general applause, it is to be inferred from it, if I mistake not, that you never saw the Lady Dulcinea, and that the said lady is nothing in the world but an imaginary lady, one that you yourself begot and gave birth to in your brain, and adorned with whatever charms and perfections you chose." "There is a good deal to be said on that point," said Don Quixote. "God knows whether there be any Dulcinea or not in the world, or whether she is imaginary or not imaginary. These are things the proof of which must not be pushed to extreme lengths. I have not begotten nor given birth to my lady, though I behold her as she needs must be, a lady who contains in herself all the qualities to make her famous throughout the world, beautiful without blemish, dignified without haughtiness, tender and yet modest, gracious from courtesy and courteous from good breeding, and lastly, of exalted lineage, because beauty shines forth and excels with a higher degree of perfection upon good blood than in the fair of lowly birth." "That is true," said the Duke. "But Señor Don Quixote will give me leave to say what I am constrained to say by the story of his exploits that I have read, from which it is to be inferred that, granting there is a Dulcinea in El Toboso, or out of it, and that she is in the highest degree beautiful as you have described her to us, as regards the loftiness of her lineage, she is not on a par with the Orianas, Alastragerias, Madasimas, or others of that sort, with whom, as you well know, the histories abound." "To that I may reply," said Don Quixote, "that Dulcinea is the daughter of her own works, and that virtues rectify blood, and that lowly virtue is more to be regarded and esteemed than exalted vice. Dulcinea, besides, has that within her that may raise her to be a crowned and sceptred queen, for the merit of a fair and virtuous woman is capable of performing greater miracles, and virtually, though not formally, she has in herself higher fortunes." "I protest, Señor Don Quixote," said the Duchess, "that in all you say you must go cautiously and lead in hand, as the saying is. Henceforth I will believe myself, and I will take care that everyone in my house believes, even my lord the Duke if needs be, that there is a Dulcinea in El Toboso, and that she is living today, and that she is beautiful and nobly born, and deserves to have such a knight as Señor Don Quixote in her service. And that is the highest praise that it is in my power to give her, or that I can think of. But I cannot help entertaining a doubt, and, having a certain grudge against Sancho Panza, the doubt is this, that the aforesaid history declares that the said Sancho Panza, when he carried a letter on your worship's behalf to the said Lady Dulcinea, found her sifting a sack of wheat, and more by token it says it was red wheat, a thing which makes me doubt the loftiness of her lineage." To this Don Quixote made answer, "Señora, your highness must know that everything, or almost everything, that happens me transcends the ordinary limits of what happens to other knights-errant, whether it be that it is directed by the inscrutable will of destiny, or by the malice of some jealous enchanter. Now it is an established fact that all or most famous knights-errant have some special gift, one, that of being proof against enchantment, another, that of being made of such invulnerable flesh that he cannot be wounded, as was the famous Roland, one of the 12 peers of France, of whom it is related that he could not be wounded except in the sole of his left foot, and that it must be with the point of a stout pin, and not with any other sort of weapon whatever. And so, when Bernardo del Carpio slew him at Roncesvalles, Finding that he could not wound him with steel, he lifted him up from the ground in his arms and strangled him, calling to mind seasonably the death which Hercules inflicted on Antaeus, the fierce giant that they say was the son of Terra. I would infer from what I have mentioned that perhaps I may have some gift of this kind, not that of being invulnerable, because experience has many times proved to me that I am of tender flesh and not at all impenetrable, nor that of being proof against enchantment, for I have already seen myself thrust into a cage in which all the world would not have been able to confine me except by force of enchantments. But as I delivered myself from that one, I am inclined to believe that there is no other that can hurt me, and so these enchanters, seeing that they cannot exert their vile craft against my person, revenge themselves on what I love most, and seek to rob me of life by maltreating that of Dulcinea in whom I live. And therefore I am convinced that when my squire carried my message to her, they changed her into a common peasant girl, engaged in such a mean occupation as sifting wheat. I have already said, however, that that wheat was not red wheat, nor wheat at all, but grains of orient pearl. And as proof of all this, I must tell your highness that, coming to El Toboso a short time back, I was altogether unable to discover the palace of Dulcinea, and that the next day, though Sancho my squire saw her in her own proper shape, which is the fairest in the world, to me she appeared to be a coarse, ill-favoured farm wench, and by no means a well-spoken one, she who is propriety itself. And so, as I am not, and, so far as one can judge, cannot be enchanted, she it is that is enchanted, that is smitten, that is altered, changed, and transformed. In her have my enemies revenged themselves upon me, and for her shall I live in ceaseless tears until I see her in her pristine state. I have mentioned this lest anybody should mind what Sancho said about Dulcinea's winnowing or sifting, for as they changed her to me, it is no wonder if they changed her to him. Dulcinea is illustrious and well-born, and of one of the gentle families of El Toboso, which are many, ancient, and good. Therein most assuredly not small is the share of the peerless Dulcinea, through whom her town will be famous and celebrated in ages to come, as Troy was through Helen, and Spain through La Cava, though with a better title and tradition. For another thing, I would have your graces understand that Sancho Panza is one of the drollest squires that ever served knight-errant. Sometimes there is a simplicity about him so acute that it is an amusement to try and make out whether he is simple or sharp. He has mischievous tricks that stamp him rogue, and blundering ways that prove him a booby. He doubts everything and believes everything. When I fancy he is on the point of coming down headlong from sheer stupidity, he comes out with something shrewd that sends him up to the skies. After all, I would not exchange him for another squire, though I were given a city to boot, and therefore I am in doubt whether it will be well to send him to the government your highness has bestowed upon him, though I perceive in him a certain aptitude for the work of governing, so that, with a little trimming of his understanding, he would manage any government as easily as the king does his taxes, and moreover, we know already ample experience that it does not require much cleverness or much learning to be a governor, for there are 100 about us that scarcely know how to read, and govern like gerfalcons. The main point is that they should have good intentions, and be desirous of doing right in all things, for they will never be at a loss for persons to advise and direct them in what they have to do, like those knight governors who, being no lawyers, pronounce sentences with the aid of an assessor. My advice to him will be to take no bribe, and surrender no right, and I have some other little matters in reserve that shall be produced in due season for Sancho's benefit, and the advantage of the island he is to govern. The Duke, Duchess, and Don Quixote had reached this point in their conversation, when they heard voices and a great hubbub in the palace, and Sancho burst abruptly into the room, all glowing with anger, with a straining cloth by way of a bib, and followed by several servants, or, more properly speaking, kitchen boys and other underlings, one of whom carried a small trough full of water, that from its colour and impurity was plainly dishwater. The one with the trough pursued him and followed him everywhere he went, endeavouring with the utmost persistence to thrust it under his chin, while another kitchen boy seemed anxious to wash his beard. "What is all this, brothers?" asked the Duchess. "What is it? What do you want to do to this good man? Do you forget he is a governor-elect?" To which the barber kitchen boy replied, "The gentleman would not let himself be washed as is customary, and as my lord and the signor his master have been." "Yes, I will," said Sancho in a great rage, "but I like to be with cleaner towels, clearer lye, and not such dirty hands. For there's not so much difference between me and my master that he should be washed with angels' water and I with devil's lye. The customs of countries and princes' palaces are only good so long as they give no annoyance, but the way of washing they have here is worse than doing penance. I have a clean beard,
and I don't require to be refreshed in that fashion, and whoever comes to wash me or touch a hair of my head, I mean to say my beard, with all due respect be it said, I'll give him a punch that will leave my fist sunk in his skull. For the ceremonies and soapings of this sort are more like jokes than polite attentions of one's host."
The Duchess was ready to die with laughter when she saw Sancho's rage and heard his words, but it was no pleasure to Don Quixote to see him in such a sorry trim, with the dingy towel about him, and the hangers-on of the kitchen all around him. So making a low bow to the Duke and Duchess, as if to ask their permission to speak, he addressed the rout in dignified tone. "Hullo, gentlemen! You let that youth alone and go back to where you came from, or anywhere else if you like. My squire is as clean as any other person, and those troughs are as bad as narrow thin-necked jars to him. Take my advice and leave him alone, for neither he nor I understand joking." Sancho took the word out of his mouth and went on. "Nay, let them come and try their jokes on the country bumpkin, for it's about as likely I'll stand them as that it's now midnight. Let them bring me a comb here or what they please and curry this beard of mine, and if they get anything out of it that offends against cleanliness, let them clip me to the skin." Upon this the Duchess, laughing all the while, said, "Sancho Panza is right, and always will be in all he says. He is clean, and, as he says himself, he does not require to be washed, and if our ways do not please him, he is free to choose. Besides, you promoters of cleanliness have been excessively careless and thoughtless. I don't know if I ought not to say audacious, to bring troughs, and wooden utensils, and kitchen dish-clouts instead of basins and jugs of pure gold and towels of Holland, to such a person and such a beard. But after all, you are ill-conditioned and ill-bred, and spiteful as you are, you cannot help showing the grudge you have against the squires of knights-errant." The impudent servitors, and even the seneschal who came with them, took the Duchess to be speaking in earnest, so they removed the straining-cloth from Sancho's neck, and with something like shame and confusion of face went off all of them and left him. Whereupon he, seeing himself safe out of that extreme danger, as it seemed to him, ran and fell on his knees before the Duchess, saying, "From great ladies great favours may be looked for. This which your grace has done me today cannot be requited with less than wishing I was dubbed a knight-errant, to devote myself all the days of my life to the service of so exalted a lady. I am a labouring man. My name is Sancho Panza. I am married. I have children, and I am serving as a squire. If in any one of these ways I can serve your highness, I will not be longer in obeying than your grace in commanding." "It is easy to see, Sancho," replied the Duchess, "that you have learned to be polite in the school of politeness itself. I mean to say, it is easy to see that you have been nursed in the bosom of Señor Don Quixote, who is, of course, the cream of good breeding and flower of ceremony. Or ceremony, as you would say yourself. Fair be the fortunes of such a master and such a servant, the one the cynosure of knight-errantry, the other the star of squirely fidelity. Rise, Sancho, my friend. I will repay your courtesy by taking care that my lord the Duke makes good to you the promised gift of the government as soon as possible." With this the conversation came to an end, and Don Quixote retired to take his midday sleep. But the Duchess begged Sancho, unless he had a very great desire to go to sleep, to come and spend the afternoon with her and her damsels in a very cool chamber. Sancho replied that, though he certainly had the habit of sleeping 4 or 5 hours in the heat of the day in summer, to serve her excellence he would try with all his might not to sleep even one that day, and that he would come in obedience to her command, and with that he went off. The Duke gave fresh orders with respect to treating Don Quixote as a knight-errant, without departing even in the smallest particular from the style in which, as the stories tell us, they used to treat the knights of old. End of Chapter 32. Recording by Phil Surrett, Ottawa, Ontario.
Chapters 33 and 34 of Don Quixote, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mike Conrad. Don Quixote, Volume 2, by Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra. Translated by John Ormsby. Chapters 33 and 34. Chapter 33. of the delectable discourse which the Duchess and her damsels held with Sancho Panza, well worth reading and noting. The history records that Sancho did not sleep that afternoon, but in order to keep his word came, before he had well done dinner, to visit the Duchess, who, finding enjoyment in listening to him, made him sit down beside her on a low seat, though Sancho, out of pure good breeding, wanted not to sit down. The Duchess, however, told him he was to sit down as governor, and talk as squire, as in both respects he was worthy of even the chair of the Cid Diaz the Campeador. Sancho shrugged his shoulders, obeyed, and sat down, and all the Duchess's damsels and duennas gathered round him, waiting in profound silence to hear what he would say. It was the Duchess, however, who spoke first, saying, "Now that we are alone, and there is nobody here to overhear us, I should be glad if the Signor Governor would relieve me of certain doubts I have, rising out of the history of the great Don Quixote that is now in print. One is, inasmuch as worthy Sancho never saw Dulcinea, I mean the Lady Dulcinea del Toboso, nor took Don Quixote's letter to her, for it was left in the memorandum book in the Sierra Morena, how did he dare to invent the answer and all that about finding her sifting wheat, the whole story being a deception and falsehood? And so much to the prejudice of the peerless Dulcinea's good name, a thing that is not at all becoming the character and fidelity of a good squire." At these words, Sancho, without uttering one in reply, got up from his chair, and with noiseless steps, with his body bent and his finger on his lips, went all round the room lifting up the hangings, and this done, he came back to his seat and said, "Now, Signora, that I have seen that there is no one except the bystanders listening to us on the sly, I will answer what you have asked me, and all you may ask me, without fear or dread. And the first thing that I have got to say is, that for the most part I hold my master Don Quixote to be stark mad, though sometimes he says things that, to my mind, and indeed everybody's that listens to him, are so wise and run in such a straight furrow, that Satan himself could not have said them better. But for all that, really, and beyond all question, it's my firm belief that he is cracked. Well then, as this is clear to my mind, I can venture to make him believe things that have neither head nor tail, like that affair of the answer to the letter, and that other of 6 or 8 days ago, which is not yet in history, that is to say, the affair of the enchantment of my lady Dulcinea. For I made him believe she is enchanted, though there is no more truth to it than over the hills of Ubeda." The Duchess begged him to tell her about the enchantment or deception, so Sancho told the whole story exactly as it had happened, and his hearers were not a little amused by it. And then resuming, the Duchess said, "In consequence of what worthy Sancho has told me, a doubt starts up in my mind, and there comes a kind of whisper to my ear that says, if Don Quixote be mad, crazy, and cracked, and Sancho Panza his squire knows it, and notwithstanding serves and follows him, and goes trusting to his empty promises, there can be no doubt he must be still madder and sillier than his master. And that being so, it will be cast in your teeth, Señora Duchess, if you give the said Sancho an island to govern, for how will he, who does not know how to govern himself, know how to govern others?" "By God, Señora," said Sancho, "but that doubt comes timely. But your grace may say it out, and speak plainly, or as you like, for I know what you say is true, and if I were wise I should have left my master long ago. But this was my fate, this was my bad luck. I can't help it, I must follow him. We're from the same village, I've eaten his bread. I'm fond of him, I'm grateful, he gave me his ass colts. And above all I'm faithful. so it's quite impossible for anything to separate us, except the pickaxe and shovel. And if your highness does not like to give me the government you promised, God made me without it, and maybe your not giving it to me will be all the better for my conscience. For fool as I am, I know the proverb, to her hurt, the ant got wings, and it may be that Sancho the squire will get to heaven sooner than Sancho the governor. And they make as good bread here as in France, and by night all cats are grey, and a hard case enough his, who hasn't broken his fast at 2 in the afternoon, and there's no stomach a hand's breadth bigger than another, and the same can be filled with straw or hay, as the saying is, and the little birds of the field have God for their purveyor and caterer, and 4 yards of Cousenna frisée keep one warmer than 4 of Segovia broadcloth, and when we quit this world and are put underground, the prince travels by as narrow a path as the journeyman, and the Pope's body does not take up more feet of earth than the sacristan's, for all that the one is higher than the other. For when we go to our graves, we all pack ourselves up and make ourselves small, or rather, they pack us up and make us small in spite of us, and then good night to us. And I say once more, if your ladyship does not like to give me the island because I am a fool, like a wise man I will take care to give myself no trouble about it. I have heard say that behind the cross there's the devil, and that all that glitters is not gold, and that from among the oxen and the ploughs and the yokes, Wamba, the husbandman, was taken to be made king of Spain, and from among brocades and pleasures and riches, Roderick was taken to be devoured by adders, if the verses of the old ballads don't lie. To be sure they don't lie, exclaimed Donna Rodriguez, the duenna who was one of the listeners. Why, there's a ballad that says they put King Rodrigo alive into a tomb full of toads and adders and lizards, and that 2 days afterwards the king, in a plaintive, feeble voice, cried out from the tomb, "They gnaw me now, they gnaw me now, there where I most did sin." And according to that the gentleman has good reason to say he would rather be a labouring man than a king, if vermin are to eat him. The Duchess could not help laughing at the simplicity of her duenna, or wondering at the language and proverbs of Sancho, to whom she said, "Worthy Sancho knows very well that when once a knight has made a promise he strives to keep it, though it should cost him his life. My lord and husband the Duke, though not one of the errant sort, is none the less a knight for that reason, and will keep his word about the promised island, in spite of the envy and malice of the world. Let Sancho be of good cheer, for when he least expect it, he will find himself seated on the throne of his island and seat of dignity, and will take possession of his government, that he may discard it for another of the 3 bordered brocade. The charge I give him is to be careful how he governs his vassals, bearing in mind that they are all loyal and well born." "As to governing them well," said Sancho, "there's no need of charging me to do that, for I'm kind-hearted by nature, and full of compassion for the poor. There's no stealing the loaf from him who needs and bakes, and by my faith, it won't do to throw false dice with me. I'm an old dog, and I know all about tuss. I can be wide awake if need be, and I don't let clouds come before my eyes, for I know where the shoe pinches me. I say so because with me the good will have support and protection, and the bad neither footing nor access. And it seems to me that, in governments, to make a beginning is everything, and maybe, after having been governor for a fortnight, I'll take kindly to the work and know more about it than the field labourer I have been brought up to." "You are right, Sancho," said the Duchess, "for no one is born ready taught, and the bishops are made out of men and not out of stones. But to return to the subject we were discussing just now, the enchantment of the lady Dulcinea, I look upon it as certain, and something more than evident, that Sancho's idea of practicing a deception upon his master, making him believe that the peasant girl was Dulcinea, and that if he did not recognize her, it must be because she was enchanted, was all a device of one of the enchanters that persecute Don Quixote. For in truth and earnest, I know from good authority that the coarse country wench who jumped up on the ass was and is Dulcinea del Toboso, and that worthy Sancho, though he fancies himself the deceiver, is the one that is deceived, and that there is no more reason to doubt the truth of this than of anything else we ever saw. Señor Sancho Panza must know that we too have enchanters here that are well disposed to us, and tell us what goes on in the world, plainly and distinctly, without subterfuge or deception. And, believe me, Sancho, that agile country lass was and is Dulcinea del Toboso, who is as much enchanted as the mother that bore her, and when we least expect it, we shall see her in her own proper form, and then Sancho will be disabused of the error he is under at present. All that's very possible, said Sancho Panza, and now I'm willing to believe what my master says about what he saw in the cave of Montesinos, where he says that he saw the lady Dulcinea del Toboso in the very same dress and apparel that I said I had seen her in when I enchanted her all to please myself. And it must be all exactly the other way, as your ladyship says, because it is impossible to suppose that out of my poor wit such a cunning trick could be concocted in a moment. Nor do I think my master is so mad that by all my weak and feeble persuasion he could be made to believe a thing so out of all reason. But, Signora, your excellence must not therefore think me ill-disposed, for a dolt like me is not bound to see into the thoughts and plots of those vile enchanters. I invented all that to escape my master's scolding, and not with any intention of hurting him, for if it has turned out differently, there is a God in heaven who judges our hearts. That is true, said the Duchess, but tell me, Sancho, what is this you say about the cave of Montesinos, for I should like to know. Sancho, upon this, related to her, word for word, what has been said already touching that adventure, and having heard it, the Duchess said, "From this occurrence it may be inferred that, as the great Don Quixote says he saw there the same country wench Sancho saw on the way from El Toboso, it is, no doubt, Dulcinea, and that there are some very active and exceedingly busy enchanters about." "So I say," said Sancho, "and if my lady Dulcinea is enchanted, so much the worse for her, and I'm not going to pick a quarrel with my master's enemies, who seem to be many and spiteful. The truth is that the one I saw was a country wench, and I set her down to be a country wench, and if that was Dulcinea it must not be laid at my door, nor should I be called to answer for it or take the consequences. But they must go nagging at me at every step. Sancho said it, Sancho did it, Sancho here, Sancho there, as if Sancho was nobody at all, and not that same Sancho Panza that's now going all over the world in books. So Samson Carrasco told me, and he's at any rate one that's a bachelor of Salmanaca, and people of that sort can't lie, except when the whim seizes them or they have some very good reason for it. There's no occasion for anybody to quarrel with me, and then I have a good character, and, as I have heard my master say, a good name is better than great riches. Let them only stick me into this government, and they'll see wonders, for one who has been a good squire will be a good governor." "All worthy Sancho's observations," said the Duchess, "are Cantonian sentences, or at any rate out of the very heart of Michael Verino himself, who florentibus occidit annis. In fact, to speak in his own style, Under a bad cloak there's often a good drinker. Indeed, Señora, said Sancho, I never yet drank out of wickedness. From thirst I have very likely, for I have nothing of the hypocrite in me. I drink when I'm inclined, or, if I'm not inclined, when they offer it to me, so as not to look either straight-laced or ill-bred. For when a friend drinks one's health, what heart can be so hard as not to return it? But if I put on my shoes, I don't dirty them. Besides, squires to knights errant mostly drink water, for they are always wandering among woods, forests, and meadows, mountains and crags, without a drop of wine to be had if they gave their eyes for it. So I believe, said the Duchess, and now let Sancho go and take his sleep, and we will talk by and by at greater length, and settle how he may soon go and stick himself into the government, as he says. Sancho once more kissed the Duchess's hand, and entreated her to let good care be taken of his Dapple, for he was the light of his eyes. What is Dapple? Said the Duchess. My ass, said Sancho, which, not to mention him by that name, I'm accustomed to call Dapple. I begged this lady duenna here to take care of him when I came to the castle, and she got as angry as if I had said she was ugly or old, though it ought to be more natural and proper for duennas to feed asses than to ornament chambers. God bless me, what a spite a gentleman of my village had against these ladies. He must have been some clown, said Donna Rodriguez the duenna. For if he had been a gentleman, and well born, he would have exalted them higher than the horns of the moon. That will do, said the Duchess. No more of this. Hush, Donna Rodriguez, and let Señor Panza rest easy, and leave the treatment of Dapple in my charge. For as he is a treasure of Sancho's, I'll put him on the apple of my eye. It will be enough for him to be in the stable, said Sancho, for neither he nor I are worthy to rest a moment in the apple of your highness's eye, and I'd as soon stab myself as consent to it. For though my master says that in civilities it is better to lose by a card too many than a card too few, when it comes to civilities to asses, we must mind what we are about and keep within due bounds. Take him to your government, Sancho, said the Duchess, and there you will be able to make as much of him as you like, and even release him from work and pension him off. Don't think, Señora Duchess, that you have said anything absurd, said Sancho. I have seen more than 2 asses go to government, and for me to take mine with me would be nothing new. Sancho's words made the Duchess laugh again and gave her fresh amusement, and dismissing him to sleep, she went away to tell the Duke the conversation she had had with him, and between them they plotted and arranged to play a joke upon Don Quixote that was to be a rare one, and entirely in knight-errantry style. And in that same style they practised several upon him, so much in keeping, and so clever, that they form the best adventures this great history contains. Chapter 34, which relates how they learned the way in which they were to disenchant the peerless Dulcinea del Toboso, which is one of the rarest adventures in this book. Great was the pleasure the Duke and Duchess took in the conversation of Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, and, more bent than ever upon the plan they had of practising some jokes upon them that should have the look and appearance of adventures, they took as their basis of action what Don Quixote had already told them about the cave of Montesinos, in order to play him a famous one. But what the Duchess marvelled at above all was that Sancho's simplicity could be so great as to make him believe as absolute truth that Dulcinea had been enchanted, when it was he himself who had been the enchanter and trickster in the business. Having, therefore, instructed their servants in everything they were to do, 6 days afterwards they took him out to hunt, with as great a retinue of huntsmen and beaters as a crowned king. They presented Don Quixote with a hunting suit, and Sancho with another of the finest green cloth. But Don Quixote declined to put his on, saying that he must soon return to hard pursuits of arms, and could not carry wardrobes or stores with him. Sancho, however, took what they gave him, meaning to sell it the first opportunity. The appointed day having arrived, Don Quixote armed himself, and Sancho arrayed himself, and mounted on his Dapple, for he would not give him up, though they offered him a horse. He placed himself in the midst of the troop of huntsmen. The Duchess came out splendidly attired, and Don Quixote, in pure courtesy and politeness, held the rein of her palfrey, though the Duke wanted not to allow him. And at last they reached a wood that lay between two high mountains, where after occupying various posts, ambushes, and paths, and distributing the party in different positions, the hunt began with great noise, shouting and hallooing, so that, between the baying of the hounds and the blowing of the horns, they could not hear one another. The Duchess dismounted, and with a sharp boar spear in her hand, posted herself where she knew the wild boars were in the habit of passing. The Duke and Don Quixote likewise dismounted and placed themselves one at each side of her. Sancho took up a position in the rear of all without dismounting from Dapple, whom he dared not desert lest some mischief should befall him. Scarcely had they taken their stand in a line with several of the servants when they saw a huge boar, closely pressed by the hounds and followed by the huntsmen, making towards them, grinding his teeth and tusks, and scattering foam from his mouth. As soon as he saw him, Don Quixote, bracing his shield on his arm, and drawing his sword, advanced to meet him. The Duke with boar spear did the same, but the Duchess would have gone in front of them all, had not the Duke prevented her. Sancho alone, deserting Dapple at the sight of the mighty beast, took to his heels as hard as he could, and strove in vain to mount a tall oak. As he was clinging to a branch, however, halfway up in his struggle to reach the top, the bough, such as was his ill luck and hard fate, gave way, and caught in his fall by a broken limb of the oak, he hung suspended in the air, unable to reach the ground. Finding himself in this position, and that the green coat was beginning to tear, and reflecting that if the fierce animal came that way he might be able to get at him, he began to utter such cries and to call for help so earnestly that all who heard him and did not see him felt sure he must be in the teeth of some wild beast. In the end, the tusked boar fell pierced by blades of the many spears they held in front of him, and Don Quixote, turning round at the cries of Sancho, for he knew by them that it was he, saw him hanging from the oak head downwards, with Dapple, who did not forsake him in his distress, close beside him. And Cide Hamete observes that he seldom saw Sancho Panza without seeing Dapple, or Dapple without seeing Sancho Panza. Such was their attachment and loyalty one to the other. Don Quixote went over and unhooked Sancho, who, as soon as he found himself on the ground, looked at the rent in his hunting coat, and was grieved to the heart, for he thought he had got a patrimonial estate in that suit. Meanwhile, they had slung the mighty boar across the back of a mule, and having covered it with sprigs of rosemary and branches of myrtle, they bore it away as the spoils of victory to some large field tents which had been pitched in the middle of the woods, where they found tables laid and dinner served, in such grand and sumptuous style that it was easy to see the rank and magnificence of those who had provided it. Sancho, as he showed the rents in his torn suit to the Duchess, observed, "If we had been hunting hares, or after small birds, my coat would have been safe from being in the plight it's in. I don't know what pleasure one can find in lying in wait for an animal that may take your life with his tusk if he gets at you. I recollect having heard an old ballad sung that says, "By bears be thou devoured, as erst was famous Favila." "That," said Don Quixote, "was a Gothic king who, going a-hunting, was devoured by a bear." "Just so," said Sancho, "and I would not have kings and princes expose themselves to such dangers for the sake of a pleasure which, to my mind, ought not to be one, as it consists in killing an animal that has done no harm whatever." "Quite to the contrary, Sancho, you are wrong there," said the duke, "for hunting is more suitable and requisite for kings and princes than for anybody else. The chase is the emblem of war. It has stratagems, wiles, and crafty devices for overcoming the enemy in safety. In it extreme cold and intolerable heat have to be borne. Indolence and sleep are despised. The bodily powers are invigorated. The limbs of him who engages in it are made supple, and, in a word, it is a pursuit which may be followed without injury to anyone and with enjoyment to many. And the best of it is not for everybody, as field sports of other sorts are, except hawking, which also is only for kings and great lords. Reconsider your opinion, therefore, Sancho, and when you are governor, take to hunting, and you will find the good of it." "Nay," said Sancho, "the good governor should have broken a leg and kept at home. It would be a nice thing if, after people had been at the trouble of coming to look for him on business, the governor were to be away in the forest enjoying himself. The government would go badly on in that fashion. By my faith, señor, hunting and amusements are more fit for idlers than for governors. What I intend to amuse myself with is playing all fours at Easter time, and bowls on Sundays and holidays, for these huntings don't suit my condition or agree with my conscience." "God grant it may turn out so," said the duke, "because it is a long step from saying to doing." "Be that as it may," said Sancho, "pledges don't distress a good payer, and he whom God helps does better than he who gets up early, and it's the tripes that carry the feet and not the feet the tripes. I mean to say that if God gives me help and I do my duty honestly, no doubt I'll govern better than a gyr-falcon. Nay, let them only put a finger in my mouth, and they'll see whether I can bite or not." "The curse of God and all his saints upon thee, thou accursed Sancho!" exclaimed Don Quixote. "When will the day come, as I have often said to thee, when I shall hear thee make one single coherent, rational remark without proverbs? Pray, your highness, leave this fool alone, for he will grind your souls between, not to say 2, but 2,000 proverbs, dragged in as much season, and as much to the purpose as, may God grant as much health to him, or to me if I want to listen to them." "Sancho Panza's proverbs," said the Duchess, "though more in number than the Greek commanders, are not therefore less to be esteemed for the conciseness of the maxims. For my own part, I can say they give me more pleasure than others that may be better brought in and more seasonably introduced." In pleasant conversation of this sort they passed out of the tent into the wood, and the day was spent visiting some of the posts and hiding places, and then night closed in, not, however, as brilliantly or tranquilly as might have been expected at the season, for it was then midsummer, but bringing with it a kind of haze that greatly aided the project of the Duke and Duchess, and thus, as night began to fall, and a little after twilight set in, suddenly the whole wood on all 4 sides seemed to be on fire, and shortly after, here, there, on all sides, a vast number of trumpets and other military instruments were heard, as if several troops of cavalry were passing through the wood. The blaze of the fire and the noise of the warlike instruments almost blinded the eyes and deafened the ears of those that stood by, and indeed of all who were in the wood. Then there were heard repeated lelilis, after the fashion of the Moors when they would rush into battle. Trumpets and clarions brayed, drums beat, fifes played, so unceasingly and so fast that he could not have had any sense who did not lose them with the confused din of so many instruments. The Duke was astounded, the Duchess amazed, Don Quixote wondering, Sancho Panza trembling, and indeed even they who were aware of the cause were frightened, and in their fear silence fell upon them, and a postilion, in the guise of a demon, passed in front of them, blowing, in lieu of a bugle, a huge hollow horn that gave out a horrible hoarse note. "Ho there, brother courier!" cried the Duke. "Who are you? Where are you going? What troops are these that seem to be passing through the wood?" To which the courier replied in a harsh, discordant voice, "I am the devil. I am in search of Don Quixote of La Mancha. Those who are coming this way are 6 troops of enchanters, who are bringing on a triumphal car the peerless Dulcinea del Toboso. She comes under enchantment together with the gallant Frenchman Montesinos, to give instructions to Don Quixote as to how she, the said lady, may be disenchanted." "If you were the devil, as you say, and your appearance indicates," said the Duke, "you would have known the said knight, Don Quixote of La Mancha, for you have him here before you." "By God, and upon my conscience," said the devil, "I never observed it, for my mind is occupied with so many different things that I was forgetting the main thing I came about." "This demon must be an honest fellow and a good Christian," said Sancho, "for if he wasn't he wouldn't swear by God and his conscience. I feel sure now there must be good souls even in hell itself." Without dismounting, the demon then turned to Don Quixote and said, "The unfortunate but valiant knight Montesinos sends me to thee, the Knight of the Lions. Would that I saw thee in their claws, bidding me tell thee to wait for him wherever I may find thee, as he brings with him her who they call Dulcinea del Toboso, that he may show thee what is needful in order to disenchant her, and as I came for no more, I need stay no longer. Demons of my sort be with thee, and good angels with these Gentiles." And so saying, he blew his huge horn, turned about, and went off without waiting for a reply from anyone. They all felt fresh wonder, but particularly Sancho and Don Quixote. Sancho to see how, in defiance of the truth, they would have it that Dulcinea was enchanted. Don Quixote, because he could not feel sure whether what had happened to him in the cave in Montesinos was true or not. And as he was deep in these cogitations, the Duke said to him, "Do you mean to wait, Señor Don Quixote?" "Why not?" replied he. "Here I will wait, fearless and firm, though all hell should come to attack me." "Well then, if I see another devil, or hear another horn like the last, I will wait here as much as in Flanders," said Sancho. Night now closed in more completely, and many lights began to flit through the woods, just as those fiery exhalations from the earth, that look like shooting stars to our eyes, flit through the heavens. A frightful noise, too, was heard, like that made by the solid wheels the ox carts usually have, by the harsh, ceaseless creaking of which, they say, the bears and wolves are put to flight, if there happen to be any where they are passing. In addition to all this commotion, there came a further disturbance to increase the tumult, for now it seemed as if in truth, on all 4 sides of the woods, 4 encounters or battles were going on at the same time. In one corner resounded the dull noise of a terrible cannonade. In another, numberless muskets were being discharged. The shouts of the combatants sounded almost close at hand, and farther away the Moorish lelilis were raised again and again. In a word, the bugles, the horns, the clarions, the trumpets, the drums, the cannon, the musketry, and above all the tremendous noise of the carts, all made up together a din so confused and terrific that Don Quixote had need to summon up all his courage to brave it. But Sancho's gave way, and he fell fainting on the skirt of the Duchess's robe, who let him lie there and promptly bade them throw water in his face. This was done, and he came to himself by the time that one of the carts with the creaking wheels reached the spot. It was drawn by 4 plodding oxen, all covered with black housings. On each horn they had fixed a large lighted wax taper, and on top of the cart was constructed a raised seat, on which sat a venerable old man with a beard whiter than the very snow, and so long that it fell below his waist. He was dressed in a long robe of black buckram, for as the cart was thickly set with a multitude of candles, it was easy to make out everything that was on it. Leading it were 2 hideous demons, also clad in buckram, with countenances so frightful that Sancho, having once seen them, shut his eyes so as not to see them again. As soon as the cart came opposite to the spot, the old man rose from his lofty seat, and standing up said in a loud voice, "I am the sage Lergandio," and without another word the cart then passed on. Behind it came another of the same form, with another aged man enthroned, who, stopping the cart, said in a voice no less solemn than that of the first, "I am the sage Alcuif, the great friend of Urganda the unknown," and passed on. Then another cart came by at the same pace, but the occupant of the throne was not old like the others, but a man stalwart and robust, and of a forbidding countenance, who, as he came up, said in a voice far hoarser and more devilish, "I am the enchanter Archialus, the mortal enemy of Amadis of Gaul and all his kindred," and then passed on. Having gone a short distance, the 3 carts halted, and the monotonous noise of their wheels ceased, and soon after they heard another, not noise, but sound of sweet harmonious music, of which Sancho was very glad, taking it to be a good sign, and said he to the Duchess, from whom he did not stir a step, or for a single instant, "Signora, where there's music there can't be mischief." "Nor where there are lights and it is bright," said the Duchess, to which Sancho replied, "Fire gives light, and it's bright where there are bonfires, as we see by those that are all round us, and perhaps may burn us, but music is a sign of mirth and merrymaking." "That remains to be seen," said Don Quixote, who was listening to all that passed, and he was right, as is shown in the following chapter. End of chapter 34. Recording by Mike Conrad, January 2009.
Chapter 35 and 36 of Don Quixote Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by David Shep. Don Quixote Volume 2 by Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra. Translated by John Ormsby. Chapter 35. Wherein is continued the instruction given to Don Quixote touching the disenchantment of Dulcinea, together with other marvelous incidents. They saw advancing towards them, to the sound of the pleasing music, what they call a triumphal car, drawn by 6 grey mules with white linen housings, on each of which was mounted a penitent, robed also in white, with large lighted wax taper in his hand. The car was twice or perhaps 3 times as large as the former ones, and in front and on the sides stood 12 more penitents, all as white as snow, and all with lighted tapers, a spectacle to excite fear as well as wonder. and on a raised throne was seated a nymph draped in a multitude of silver-tissued veils, with an embroidery of countless gold spangles glittering all over them, that made her appear, if not richly, at least brilliantly apparelled. She had her face covered with a thin transparent sendal, the texture of which did not prevent the fair features of a maiden from being distinguished, while the numerous lights made it possible to judge of her beauty and of her years, which seemed to be not less than 17, but to have not yet reached 20. Beside her was a figure in a robe of state, as they call it, reaching to the feet, while the head was covered with a black veil. But the instant the car was opposite the Duke and Duchess and Don Quixote, the music of the clarions ceased, and then that of the lutes and harps on the car, and the figure in the robe rose up, and flinging it apart and removing the veil from its face, disclosed to their eyes the shape of death itself, fleshless and hideous, at which sight Don Quixote felt uneasy, Sancho frightened, and the Duke and Duchess displayed a certain trepidation. Having risen to its feet, this living death, in a sleepy voice and with a tongue hardly awake, held forth as follows. I am that Merlin who the legends say the devil had for father, and the lie hath gathered credence in the lapse of time. O magic prince of Zerathic lore, monarch and treasurer with jealous eye, I view the efforts of the age to hide the gallant deeds of doughty errant knights, who are, and ever have been, dear to me. Enchanters and magicians and their kind are mostly hard of heart, not so am I, for mine is tender, soft, compassionate, and its delight is doing good to all, in the dim caverns of the gloomy depths, where tracing my mystic lines and characters, my soul abitteth now. There came to me the sorrow-laden plight of her the fair, the peerless Dulcinea del Toboso. I knew of her enchantment and her fate. From high-born dame to peasant wretch transformed, and touched with pity first I turned the leaves of countless volumes of my devilish craft, and then, in the grim grisly skeleton myself encasing, hither have I come to show where lies the fitting remedy to give relief in such a pious case. O thou, the pride and pink of all that wear the adamantine steel, O shining light, O beacon, pole star, path and guide of all, who, scorning slumber and the lazy down, adopt the toilsome life of blood-stained arms, to thee, great hero, who all praise transcends, La Mancha's lustre and Iberra's star, Don Quixote, wise and brave, to thee I say, for peerless Dulcinea del Toboso, her pristine form and beauty to regain, 'tis needful that the squire Sancho shall on his own sturdy buttocks bear to heaven 3,300 lashes lay, and that they smart and sting and hurt him well. Thus have the authors of her woe resolved, and this is gentlest wherefore I have come. By all that's good, exclaimed Sancho to this, I'll just as soon give myself 3 stabs with a dagger as 3, not to say 3,000 lashes. The devil takes such a way of disenchanting. I don't see what my backside has got to do with enchantments. By God, if Signor Merlin has not found out some other way of disenchanting the Lady Dulcinea del Toboso, she may go to her grave enchanted. But I'll take you, Don Clown, stuffed with garlics, said Don Quixote, and tie you to a tree as naked as when your mother brought you forth, and give you not to say 3,300, but 6,600 lashes, and so well laid on that they won't be got rid of if you try 3,300 times. Don't answer me a word, or I'll tear your soul out. On hearing this, Merlin said, That will not do, for the lashes worthy Sancho has to receive must be given of his own free will, and not by force, at whatever time he pleases. for there is no fixed limit assigned to him, but it is permitted him, if he likes to commute by half the pain of this whipping, to let them be given by the hand of another, though it may be somewhat weighty. Not a hand, my own or anybody else's, weighty or weightable, shall touch me, said Sancho. Was it I that gave birth to the lady Dulcinea del Toboso, that my backside is to pay for the sins of her eyes? My master, indeed, that's a part of her, for he's always calling her my life and my soul, and his stay and prop, may and ought to whip himself for her and take all the trouble required for her disenchantment. But for me to whip myself? Abernarco! As soon as Sancho had done speaking, the nymph in silver that was at the side of Merlin's ghost stood up, and removing the thin veil from her face, disclosed one that seemed to all something more than exceedingly beautiful. And with a masculine freedom from embarrassment, and in that voice not very like a lady's, addressing Sancho directly, said, "Thou wretched squire, soul of a pitcher, heart of a cork tree, and bowels of flint and pebbles, if, thou impudent thief, they bade thee throw thyself down from some lofty tower, if enemy of mankind, if they asked thee to swallow a dozen toads, 2 lizards, and 3 adders, if they wanted thee to slay thy wife and children with a sharp murderous scimitar, it would be no wonder for thee to show thyself stubborn and squeamish. But to make piece of work about 3,300 lashes? What every poor little charity boy gets every month? It is enough to amaze, astonish, and astound the compassionate bowels of all who hear it, nay, all who come to hear it in the course of time. Turn, O miserable, hard-hearted animal, turn, I say, those timorous owl's eyes upon these of mine that are compared to radiant stars. Oh, thou wilt see them weeping, trickling streams and rills, and tracing furrows, tracks, and paths over the fair fields of my cheeks. Let it move thee, crafty, ill-conditioned monster, to see my blooming youth, still in its teens, for I am not yet 20, wasting and withering away beneath the husk of a rude peasant wretch. And if I do not appear in that shape now, it is a special favor Signor Merlin here has granted me, to the sole end that my beauty may soften thee. For the tears of beauty and distress turn rocks into cotton, and tigers into ewes. Lay on to that hide of thine, thou great untamed brute, rouse up thy lusty vigor that only urges thee to eat, and set free the softness of my flesh, the gentleness of my nature, and the fairness of my face. And if thou wilt not relent, or come to reason for me, do so for the sake of that poor knight thou hast beside thee, thy master, I mean, whose soul I can this moment see, how he has it stuck in his throat, not 10 fingers from his lips, and only waiting for thy inflexible or yielding reply to make its escape by his mouth or go back again into his stomach." Don Quixote, on hearing this, felt his throat, and turning to the Duke, he said, "By God, Señor, Dulcinea says true. I have my soul stuck here in my throat like the nut of a crossbow." "What say you to this, Sancho?" said the Duchess. "I say, Señora," returned Sancho, "what I said before. As for the lashes, abernarco!" "Abernarco, you should say, Sancho, and not as you do," said the Duke. "Let me alone, your highness," said Sancho. "I am not in a humour now to look into niceties or letter more or less, for these lashes that are to be given me, or I am to give myself, have so upset me that I don't know what I am saying or doing. But I'd like to know of this lady, my lady Dulcinea del Toboso, where she learned this way she has for asking favours. She comes to ask me to score my flesh with lashes, and she calls me soul of a pitcher, and great untamed brute, and sting of foul names that the devil is welcome to. Is my flesh brass, or is it anything to me whether she is enchanted or not? Does she bring with her a basket of fair linen, shirts, kerchiefs, socks, not that wear any, to coax me? No, nothing but one piece of abuse after another, though she knows the proverb they have here, that an ass loaded with gold goes lightly up a mountain, and that gifts break rocks, and praying to God, and plying the hammer, and that one take is better than 2. I'll give these. Then there's my master, who ought to stroke me down and pet me to make me turn wool and carded cotton. He says if he gets hold of me, he'll tie me naked to a tree and double the tale of lashes on me. These tender-hearted gentry should consider that it's not merely a squire, but a governor they are asking to whip himself, just as if it was drink with cherries. Let them learn, plague take them, the right way to ask and beg and behave themselves, for all times are not alike, nor are people always in good humor. I am now ready to burst with grief at seeing my green coat torn, and they come to me to whip myself of my own free will, I having as little fancy for it as a turning cacique. Well then, the fact is, friend Sancho, said the Duke, that unless you become softer than a ripe fig, you shall not get a hold of the government. It would be a nice thing for me to send my islanders a cruel governor with flinty bowels, who won't yield to the tears of afflicted damsels, or to the prayers of wise, magisterial ancient enchanters and sages. In short, Sancho, either you must be whipped by yourself, or they must whip you, or you shan't be governor. Señor, said Sancho, won't 2 days' grace be given me in which to consider what is best for me? No! Certainly not, said Merlin. Here, this minute and on the spot, the matter must be settled. Either Dulcinea will return to the cave of Montesinos and to her former condition of peasant wretch, or else in her present form shall be carried to the Elysian fields, where she will remain, waiting until the number of stripes is completed. Now then, Sancho, said the Duchess, show courage and gratitude for your master Don Quixote's bread that you have eaten. We are all bound to oblige and please him for his benevolent disposition and lofty chivalry. Consent to this whipping, my son, to the devil with the devil, and leave fear to millsops. For a stout heart breaks bad luck, as you very well know. To this Sancho replied with an irrelevant mark, which, addressing Merlin, he made to him. Will your worship tell me, Señor Merlin, when that courier devil came up, he gave my master a message from Señor Montesinos, charging him to wait for him here, as he was coming to arrange how the lady Donna Dulcinea del Toboso was to be disenchanted, but up to the present we have not seen Montesinos, nor anything like him. To which Merlin made answer, the devil, Sancho, is a blockhead and a great scoundrel. I sent him to look for your master, but not with a message from Montesinos, but from myself. For Montesinos is in his cave expecting, or more properly speaking, waiting for his disenchantment. For there's the tale to be skinned yet for him. If he owes you anything, or if you have any business to transact with him, I'll bring him to you and put him where you choose. But for the present make up your mind to consent to the penance, for believe me, it will be very good for you, for soul as well as for body, for your soul because of the charity with which you perform it, for your body, because I know that you are of sanguine habit, and it will do you no harm to draw a little blood. There are a great many doctors in this world. Even the enchanters are doctors, said Sancho. However, as everyone tells me the same thing, though I can't see it myself, I say I am willing to give myself the 3,300 lashes, provided I am to lay them on whenever I like, without any fixing of days or times. And I'll try to get out of debt as quickly as I can, that the world may enjoy the beauty of the lady Dulcinea del Toboso, as it seems, contrary to what I thought, that she is beautiful after all. It must be a condition, too, that I am not to be bound to draw blood with the scourge, and that if any of the lashes happen to be fly-flappers, they are to count. Item, that, in this case, I should make any mistake in the reckoning, Señor Merlin, as he knows everything, is to keep count and let me know how many are still wanting or over the number. There will be no need to let you know of any over, said Merlin, because when you reach the full number, the lady Dulcinea will at once, and that very instant, be disenchanted, and will come in her gratitude to seek out the worthy Sancho, and thank him, and even reward him for the good work. So you have no cause to be uneasy about stripes too many or too few. Heaven forbid I should cheat anyone of even a hair of his head. Well then, in God's hands be it, said Sancho. In the hard case I am in, I give in. I say I accept the penance on the conditions laid down. The instant Sancho uttered these last words, the music of the clarions struck up once more, and again a host of muskets were discharged, and Don Quixote hung on Sancho's neck, kissing him again and again on the forehead and cheeks. The Duchess and the Duke expressed their greatest satisfaction. The car began to move on, and as it passed, the fair Dulcinea bowed to the Duke and Duchess, and made a low curtsy to Sancho. And now the bright smiling dawn came upon apace. The flowers of the field revived, raised up their heads, and the crystal waters of the brooks murmuring over the grey and white pebbles hastened to pay their tribute to the expectant rivers. The glad earth, the unclouded sky, the fresh breeze, the clear light, each and all showed that the day had come, treading on the skirts of morning, would be calm and bright. The Duke and Duchess, pleased with their hunt, and having carried out their plans so cleverly and successfully, returned to their castle, resolved to follow up their joke, for to them there was no reality that could afford them more amusement. Chapter 36, wherein is related the strange and undreamt of adventure of the distressed duenna, alias the Countess of Trifaldi, together with the letter which Sancho Panza wrote to his wife Teresa Panza. The Duke had a major domo of a very factious and supportive turn, and he it was that played the part of Merlin, made all the arrangements for the late adventure, composed the verses, and got a page to represent Dulcinea. And now, with the assistance of his master and mistress, he got up another of the drollest and strangest contrivances that can be imagined. The Duchess asked Sancho the next day if he had made a beginning with his penance task, which he had to perform for the disenchantment of Dulcinea. He said he had, and had given himself 5 lashes overnight. The Duchess asked him what he had given them with. He said, with his hand. That, said the Duchess, is more like giving oneself slaps than lashes. I am sure the sage Merlin will not be satisfied with such tenderness. Worthy Sancho must make a scourge with claws, or a cat o' nine tails that will make itself felt, for it's with blood that letters enter, and the release of so great a lady as Dulcinea will not be granted so cheaply, or at such a paltry price. And remember, Sancho, that works of charity done in a lukewarm and half-hearted way are without merit and of no avail. To which Sancho replied, if your ladyship will give me a proper scourge or cord, I'll lay on with it, provided it does not hurt too much. For you must know, boar as I am, my flesh is more cotton than hemp, and it won't do for me to destroy myself for the good of anybody else. So be it, by all means, said the Duchess. Tomorrow I'll give you a scourge that will be just the thing for you, and will accommodate itself to the tenderness of your flesh, as if it were its own sister. Then, said Sancho, your highness must know, dear lady of my soul, that I have a letter written to my wife Teresa Panza, giving her an account of all that has happened me since I left her. I have it here in my bosom, and there's nothing wanting but to put the address to it. I'll be glad if your discretion would read it, for I think it runs in the governor's style, I mean the way governors ought to write. And who dictated it? Said the Duchess. That I didn't, said Sancho, for I can neither read nor write, though I can sign my name. Let us see it, said the Duchess, for never fear but you display it in the quality and quantity of your wit. Sancho drew out an open letter from his bosom, and the Duchess, taking it, found it ran in this fashion. Sancho Panza's letter to his wife Teresa Panza. If I was well whipped, I went mounted like a gentleman. If I have got a good government, it is at the cost of a good whipping. Thou wilt not understand this just now, my Teresa. By and by thou wilt know what it means. I may tell thee, Teresa, I mean thee to go in a coach, for that is a matter of importance, because every other way of going is going on all fours. Thou art a governor's wife. Take care that nobody speaks evil of thee behind thy back. I send thee here a green hunting suit that my lady the Duchess gave me. Alter it so as to make a petticoat and bodice for our daughter. Don Quixote, my master, if I am to believe what I hear in these parts, is a madman of some sense, and a droll blockhead, and I am no way behind him. We have been in the cave of Montesinos, and the sage Merlin has laid hold of me for the disenchantment of Dulcinea del Toboso, her that is called Aldonza Lorenzo over there, with 3,300 lashes, less 5 that I am to give myself. She will be left as entirely disenchanted as the mother that bore her. Say nothing of this to anyone, for make thy affairs public, and some will say they are white, and others will say they are black. I shall leave this in a few days for my government, to which I am going with a mighty desire to make money. For they tell me all new governors set out with the same desire. I will feel the pulse of it, and will let thee know if thou art to come and live with me or not. Dapple is well, and sends many remembrances to thee. I am not going to leave him behind, though they took me away to be Grand Turk. My lady the Duchess kisses thy hands 1,000 times. Do thou make a return with 2,000? For as my master says, nothing costs less, or is cheaper than civility. God has not been pleased to provide another valise for me with another 100 crowns, like the one the other day, but never mind, my Teresa. The bell ringer is in safe quarters, and all will come out in the scouring of the government. Only it troubles me greatly what they tell me, that once I have tasted it, I will eat my hands off after it, and if that is so, it will not come very cheap to me, though to be sure the maimed have a benefice of their own in the alms they beg for, so that one way or another thou wilt be rich in luck. God give it to thee as he can, and keep me to serve thee. From this castle, the 20th of July, 1614. Thy husband the governor, Sancho Panza. When she had done reading the letter, the Duchess said to Sancho, On 2 points the worthy governor goes rather astray. One is in saying, or hinting, that this government has been bestowed upon him for the lashes that he is to give himself, when he knows, and he cannot deny it, that when my lord the Duke promised it to him, nobody ever dreamt of such a thing as lashes. The other is that he shows himself here to be very covetous, and I would not have him a money-seeker, for covetous bursts the bag, and the covetous governor does ungoverned justice. I don't mean it that way, Signora, said Sancho, and if you think the letter doesn't run as it ought to do, it's only to tear it up and make another, and maybe it will be a worse one if it is left to my gumption. No, no, said the Duchess, this one will do, and I wish the Duke to see it. With this, they betook themselves to the garden where they were to dine, and the Duchess showed Sancho's letter to the Duke, who was highly delighted with it. They dined, and after the cloth had been removed, and they had assumed themselves for a while, within Sancho's rich conversation the melancholy sound of a fife and harsh discordant drum made itself heard. All seemed somewhat put out by this dull, confused, martial harmony, especially Don Quixote, who could not keep his seat from pure disquietude. As to Sancho, it is needless to say that fear drove him to his usual refuge, the side or the skirts of the Duchess, and indeed, and in truth, the sound they heard was a most soulful and melancholy one. While they were still in uncertainty, they saw advancing towards them through the garden 2 men clad in mourning robes, so long and flowing that they trailed upon the ground. As they marched, they beat 2 great drums, which were likewise draped in black, and beside them came the fife-player, black and sombre like the others. Following these came a personage of gigantic stature, enveloped rather than clad in gown and the deepest black, the skirt of which was of prodigious dimensions. Over the gown, girdled or crossing his figure, he had a broad baldric which was so black, and from which hung a huge scimitar with a black scabbard and furniture. He had his face covered with a transparent black veil, through which might be descried a very long beard as white as snow. He came on keeping step to the sound of the drums with great gravity and dignity, and, in short, his stature, his gait, the sombreness of his appearance, and his following might well have struck with astonishment as they did all who beheld him without knowing who he was. With his measured pace and in his guise, he advanced to kneel before the Duke, who, with the others, awaited him standing. The Duke, however, would not on any account allow him to speak until he had risen. The prodigious scarecrow obeyed, and standing up, removed the veil from his face and disclosed the most enormous, the longest, the widest, and the thickest beard that human eyes had ever beheld until that moment. And then, fetching up a grave, sonorous voice from the depths of this broad, capacious chest, and fixing his eyes on the Duke, he said, "Most high and mighty Signor, my name is Trifaldin of the White Beard. I am squire to the Countess Trifaldi, otherwise called the distressed duenna, on whose behalf I bear a message to your highness, which is that your magnificence will be pleased to grant her leave and permission to come and tell you her trouble, which is one of the strangest and most wonderful that the mind most familiar with trouble in the world could have imagined. But first she desires to know if the valiant and never vanquished knight Don Quixote of La Mancha is in your castle, for she has come in quest of him, on foot and without breaking her fast from the kingdom of Candy to your realms here, a thing which may and ought to be regarded as a miracle, or set down to enchantment. She is even now at the gate of this fortress or palaisance, and only waits for your permission to enter. I have spoken." And with that he coughed and stroked down his beard with both his hands, and stood very tranquilly, waiting for the response of the Duke, which was to this effect: "Many days ago, worthy Squire Trifaldin of the White Beard, we heard of the misfortune of my lady the Countess Trifaldi, whom the enchanters have caused to be called the distressed duenna. Bid her enter, O stupious squire, and tell her that the valiant knight Don Quixote of La Mancha is here, and from his generous disposition she may safely promise herself every protection and assistance. And you may tell her, too, that if my aid be necessary, it will not be withheld, for I am bound to give it to her by my quality of knight, which involves the protection of women of all sorts, especially widowed, wronged, and distressed dames, such as her ladyship seems to be." On hearing this, Trifaldin bent the knee to the ground, and, making the sign to the fifer and drummers to strike up, he turned and marched out of the garden to the same notes, and at the same pace as when he entered, leaving them all amazed at his bearing and solemnity. Turning to Don Quixote, the Duke said, "After all, renowned knight, the mists of malice and ignorance are unable to hide or obscure the light of value and virtue. I say so because your excellence has been barely 6 days in this castle, and already the unhappy and the afflicted come in quest of you from lands far distant and remote, and not in coaches or dromedaries, but on foot and fasting, confident that in the mighty arm they will find a cure for their sorrows and troubles, thanks to your great achievements which are circulated all over the known earth." "I wish, Señor Duke," replied Don Quixote, "that blessed elastic, who at table the other day showed such ill will and bitter spite against knights errant, were here now to see with his own eyes whether knights of the sort are needed in the world. He would at any rate learn by experience that those suffering any extraordinary affliction or sorrow, in extreme cases and unusual misfortunes, do not go to look for a remedy to the houses of jurists or village sacraments, or to the knight who has never attempted to pass the bounds of his own town, or to the indolent courier who only seeks for news to repeat and talk of, instead of striving to do deeds and exploits for others to relate and record, relief in distress, help in need, protection for damsels, consolidation for widows, are to be found in no sort of persons better than I, knights errant. And I give unceasing thanks to heaven that I am one, and regard any misfortune or suffering that may befall me in the pursuit of so honourable a calling as endured to good purpose. Let this duenna come and ask what she will, for I will effect her relief by the might of my arm and the dauntless resolution of my bold heart." End of chapter 35 and 36, recorded by David Shep in Los Angeles.